I struggle with even standing up for myself when needs be. And so that's kind of how I've just seen authority throughout my life is like, you know what, why fight them? You're going to lose anyway. And unfortunately, there are times you need to fight. So I stuffed my big problem. I wound up being put in the charge of another adult male. I was staying out at the farm at one of my dad's friends' farms, and it turns out that man was a pedophile.
She's married. You're engaged. So you're basically having an affair with this older woman. Where are you emotionally and spiritually?
But when I had to be sober, I would, smoke my cigarettes and put them out on my arm. Yeah, if I was really bored, light the cigarette again and put it out again and light it again.
How did you offer forgiveness to the man who assaulted you as a child? How did you offer forgiveness?
That's a great question.
Many years ago, my wife and I noticed a hump in our kitchen floor. We ignored it for a while, but the hump kept getting bigger and bigger. We had it checked out, and we discovered that the toilet on the opposite side of the wall was leaking every time we flushed it. The leak didn't stay in the bathroom. It moved through the drywall and into the kitchen subfloor, warping the wood, and then it pushed its way up through the vinyl floor, causing the hump. The hump was just a symptom of a greater problem that would not stay hidden. And so it is with my life. As I walk through life, I will experience hurt and trauma. It is inevitable. And if I choose to stuff that hurt and ignore the real problem, it will not remain hidden. In fact, it may push its way up into my life in harmful and painful ways. How does a person deal with past trauma and hurt in a healthy way? Is there really healing in the revealing? How do I invite God and someone into that hurt? These are questions that I want to ask our guest today as he shares his life change story with us. I'm Eric Hutchinson, and this is the If Nothing Changes podcast. Today, our guest is zooming in all the way from South Dakota. So, hey, new friend, why don't you introduce yourself to our listeners?
Hey, folks. I'm a grateful believer in Jesus Christ. I came into recovery for hurts, hangups, and habits based on childhood sexual abuse, sexual addiction, and codependency. And my name is Dan.
Hey, Dan. Well, welcome to my podcast. I'm so excited to have you, and thank you for agreeing to do this. And I'm so glad that we have this technology that we can talk to each other. So every story has a beginning. And so why don't you walk us through where you were born and where you were raised, and tell us a little bit about your family of origin.
Well, so I was born into a military family. My dad was a career chaplain in the Army. He was also a Vietnam veteran as an enlisted man before that. And I was born in Indiana, but that's kind of irrelevant because I think we were there maybe 2 months. And I spent most of my childhood bouncing around to different military posts. So I've had the privilege of living, I believe I counted up one time, about 32 addresses altogether in life. And quite enjoyable, actually. I've been the East Coast, the West Coast, the South, the North, Korea, Germany, just a number of places, the Middle East as well. So it was a nice upbringing, and I got around.
Wow, so, 32 places. That's amazing. So do you have any siblings, or are you an only child?
I'm the youngest of four. And of course, by nature, the favorite and the best looking. Your listeners are going to have to just trust me on that best looking part. But yeah, I was definitely the youngest, the last one born, the last one to leave the nest. But I didn't really feel terribly close to them, though, to be honest. But I think that's kind of the nature of our family. My family, historically, are Scottish Presbyterians, and they have been for as far back as they can trace it. And so we don't get too terribly excited. We don't particularly like each other. Not that we dislike each other, but you just don't show affection. It's not part of the program. It's not part of the culture that we were raised in.
So it doesn't sound like you grew up with a lot of hugs and kisses then from family members.
No, I'd say not. My sister was probably the closest thing to affectionate, but that didn't last very long. Once I got to where I could start talking, I think that relationship got a little cold. But
Yeah. So you mentioned that your dad was a chaplain. Is that correct? Okay.
yes, sir.
So that's interesting. So one of the questions I normally ask is, was there faith in your family? Did you guys pray? Was God a part of your family? I mean, tell me a little bit about that growing up. I mean, what was your belief about God?
Well, I think I kind of had some of the. I think I had somewhat of that angry God kind of understanding. Uh, so I don't want to get too far off into my dad's story because that's his story, but he didn't give his life to Christ until after Vietnam. And Vietnam was a very difficult experience. He dealt with the trauma from those experiences for years and years. I would say probably to some degree, even still does a little bit. But you look to your father a lot of times, and you kind of model your understanding of God a little bit on your biological father if you grew up with him. And so, looking at that, I hate to say it, but my dad was kind of an angry guy. Um, I know he loved the Lord, and I know that he struggled with that, but he was an angry guy. He was kind of prone to snapping. It's like he never quite knew what it was that was going to push him over the edge and get you a really good whooping. Um, Mom was kind of emotionally distant, and so I didn't grow up with this idea of a warm fuzzy God. I really grew up with this idea of an angry God. And when I started kind of being a complete screw up myself, I spent a lot of time really just like knowing, like, I am going to hell. This sucks. I don't want to go there. Um, but that's just kind of how I saw God. Was like, if I knew the gospel, like I know that it's true that salvation is by grace through faith. You can't earn that. But that took many, many years to actually get into my heart to understand that. Even after I was saved, I struggled with that for years and years and years. So yeah, that's kind of the perception of God as I grew up. Uh, Church was a very rigid and very boring thing. I saw church life as this like, oh, I got to get through this, got to survive it. It was not fun or enjoyable. And I know that I know that my parents loved the Lord, but it wasn't until much, much later in his own life that my dad really reflected that kind of passion. And so that was foreign, and hugging, just not a thing.
So did your father get inappropriately physical? Did he spank you appropriately, or did he go overboard with it?
There was certainly times of, perfectly legitimate discipline, but when there was that snap, that's when it crossed the line. And there was a few times that I certainly remember. Um, I think the last time I ever actually got a whooping, I didn't leave the house for days on end afterwards, and I had to heal. I had to heal up from it.
So what did that do to Dan? How did you feel about yourself? Did that create fear in you? Were you really scared? Did you try to avoid your dad? And what about your self-esteem? Did you feel confident in yourself, like, up to, as you got into middle school and that time? I mean, did you feel confident in yourself, or were you more withdrawn? Tell me a little bit about what was going on inside of you.
When you're taught to respect your elders, to obey those in authority, and there's not room to question it, at some point that comes out. And so I would say one of the more notable effects of that in life has just been that literally up until today, I struggle with even standing up for myself when needs be. Um, Not that I'm a complete doormat, but I see that in my work relationships. The boss says this, fine. I'm going to keep my mouth shut and just do what the boss says. And I'm going to do my best to make the boss happy. And I think there's a degree where that can be certainly virtuous, but there's a degree where it sets yourself up for being taken advantage of. And I think that in particular had a pretty significant impact. It's like, what's the point? And so that's kind of how I've just seen authority throughout my life is like, you know what, why fight them? You're going to lose anyway. And unfortunately, there are times you need to fight.
Right.
So that's
Yeah.
been a difficult lesson to learn.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. So before you get into high school, so let's say, pre high school, if you could nail one thing that you struggled with the most, what was the thing that you struggled with the most? Was there something that happened to you, or was there a character defect, or relationships, or what was it that you struggled with the most?
That's a big question. So yeah, I would say on a day-to-day struggle, just fitting in. I was an oddball kid. I really was. And so I did not develop friendships well. I think when you're raised in that military environment where you move a lot, you do tend to make friends quickly. But I think you also you don't tend to make friends deeply. And so you add just that dynamic on top of just being kind of a weirdo. Okay, I was. That's just the truth. Um, I think a word. I don't know if this would be appropriate or not, but uh, the truth is, I was a dork. Okay, I think that would be the word that the kids would use. You're a dork, um, and I was. Some of that was attention seeking, um, and like I said, some of that is just my mind just kind of works different than other people. I see things differently. So, yeah, if I didn't fit in, um, I stuffed my big problem. And so I look back and I don't think it was conscientiously on my mind, but it was a problem. We talked about that mindset of not confronting and doing what you're told. I was just that very authoritarian upbringing I had. So at some point, 10, 12 years old, about middle schoolish, I don't exactly remember when, but I wound up uh, being put in the charge of another adult male. I was staying out at the farm at one of my dad's friends' farms, and it turns out that man was a pedophile. And the difficulty with that was, even though there was a part of me that says, "Well, yeah, I mean, this isn't right," but you're taught to just obey and to not question authority. And so I didn't feel that room in my head or my heart to like question, like what's going on with this, Um, and so I couldn't say it, right? And I didn't dare bring that back. I will tell you, growing up, going to school, when there was a problem at school, it didn't matter. It was my fault. There was no concept in our family of, well, yeah, this teacher's a difficult teacher, or this teacher's overly strict, or whatever, or nope, whatever my teacher said was gospel, and I was wrong every single time, no matter what. And so when I got into this situation where I was being, sexually offended on by an adult male, I already had that in my head. Like, well, if I was to say something, if I was to bring this up, it would somehow come back to being my fault. You know, and if there's something wrong going on here, I'm probably misunderstanding it. So that certainly caused a lot of confusion. And so at a young age there, I began sexually acting out on my own, and I don't think I need to explain what I mean by that. Um, and so that there was that going on, and but my response to that for several years was basically complete denial. So I didn't walk around thinking about that. That's why I say it wasn't like my biggest day-to-day struggle, but
Yeah.
it certainly affected my outlook. Go ahead.
Yeah. So, wow, you talked about a lot right there. Tell me a little bit. And again, I'm not asking for details, but
Yeah.
the first time that something like that happens, and I've had guests on here that were, molested as children, and that's a traumatic event. Talk about PTSDs. I mean, that's a traumatic event. How did you deal with that? I mean, did you really just, was it compartmentalized and you just kept it completely out? And why did you go back? I mean, tell me a little bit about what was going on.
That's a great question, and I'm not sure I can answer all of that. Um, but yeah, so I wound up going out there to the farm a handful of times, several different times, usually for uh, 3 to 7 days at a time, I suppose. I was still pretty young, like I said, and this took place over the course of probably 2 years, I suppose. It is a little fuzzy, and I suppose part of why it's fuzzy is because, yeah, it was that extreme compartmentalizing. Like, no, it was blocked off for a long time. And I say that, but I also know that it was there. You know what I mean? Like, it's hard to explain, but it was always kind of there. But I did everything I could to push it down
Yeah.
and make it not there. But yeah, it was an older guy and his wife living alone, and anytime she wasn't around,
So you don't
you know,
think the wife knew about it at all then, right?
I mean, being realistic, how could she not? I think she was probably very caught, very stuck. A few years later, I discovered that everyone knew that this guy was a pedophile. That's the bottom line. We're talking, small rural town, and so and other kids in the church knew about that and had been victimized by him. To my knowledge, the church never addressed it. How does that happen? I don't know.
But your mom and dad, you said everybody knew, but your mom and dad didn't know. I mean, they wouldn't have sent you there knowing that, right?
So ultimately, what happened was they found out from they heard rumors. So I don't know, nothing that could be substantiated. Nobody would stand up and say, yes, this happened, but they heard the rumors. And the weird thing is, they talked to my older brother because my older brother had actually spent a lot more time, had worked with this guy. They talked to him and asked him. He said, no, nothing ever happened, but they never sent any of us out there to do that again. So they avoided and they asked him, but they never asked me. And I can't explain that. You know, Years later, after I had been in recovery and stuff, after I had dealt with this, I did sit down with my dad and I told him, a lot about this. And I asked him that question. And I never got a good answer, to be honest. And I'm not trying to I'm not trying to throw my dad under the bus. A lot of healings happened in our relationship and in his own life. But so yeah, I actually had to wrestle that as I was going through a step study and dealing with all this stuff. I had to wrestle with the question of what were my parents doing here and why did they never ask me?
Yeah. Yeah.
But again, I think that comes back to the culture.
Yeah. You just don't
I
talk
hate to
about
say
it.
but I think it does.
Yeah.
Exactly.
You don't talk
just
about those
don't
things.
Talk about stuff.
Yeah. Well, so you said that was about 2 years. So you're starting to get into teenage stuff now. So it sounds to me like you kind of buried it a little bit, but do you feel like that pushed you into, did it make you feel about yourself any differently? And, where did that push you with friends and at school or anything else? Did it push you into anything or just tell me about as you move forward in your age group?
I would say, I became sexually active relatively young. I think that, triggered that, had a lot to do with it. I think throughout the next, several years through high school, through the teenage years, I tended to find the down and out crowd, I guess, if you will. And I had quite a number of friends who were female. I will say, very, very few male friends, and certainly not close male friends. Just never trusted males after that. And so the vast majority of my friends were female, and the vast majority of them had also experienced, very dysfunctional families, a lot of abuse, things like that. And I never understood why that was my crowd. I guess I never thought about it. But looking back, I realized, oh, well, it's kind of obvious now. And yeah, I certainly got into sexual relationships with plenty of them.
So what did you do right after high school? Did you get a job? Did you go into the military? Did you, what did you decide to do whenever you graduated?
The only thing anybody in my family knows to do, go join the Army. Yeah. So I met a girl my senior year, and she lived on the other side of the state, but hey, So I went and joined the Army, and at basic training, graduation, she came up to Fort Knox, and I went to the PX, to the post exchange. I bought a ring there, this little jewelry counter they had, and I stuck it on there and got engaged to her, because despite the fact that we really hardly knew each other that much, I was like, this, she's the one, you know. Got engaged, and did my advanced training, and took a little leave and saw her, and then went to Korea, because, as we all know, the best thing you can do for a young 18-year-old is give them money and send them to a foreign country with no accountability.
Did you want to go to Korea then? Did you want to be deployed?
You know, seeing the world is, I grew up moving around. I enjoyed that aspect. I actually really like the idea of moving around. And so I was perfectly fine with going to Korea.
So you go to Korea, you're engaged but not married. Did you stay faithful to your fiance while you're in Korea?
No, no. Um, Stayed faithful for a good part of the year. So Korea is kind of where bad turned to worse, I'd say. I will say the first night there, literally the first night, you get this briefing. Okay, you show up on the airplane, you go to check in, if you will, and the first night there, they tell you right off the bat, you're not allowed to leave post. You got all these rules on you, and that's one of the big ones. No drinking, no leaving post, no none of that stuff. You have to have all these briefings first, and they're going to talk to you about STDs and drinking and driving and drinking safely and drinking ages and don't drink and all this stuff. But you have to have hours of these briefings before you can go off post. But then they put us up in a hotel, and I get a roommate who's an E5, a sergeant, and this is his second tour in Korea. So we get in there, and the first thing out of his mouth is, "Man, forget all that stuff. Forget what they said. Okay, listen, I've been here. I've done this. Let's go." I'm like, "What are you talking about?" He's like, "Come on, let's go. We're going to go and hit the town." Okay. So it's my first night in country, and he introduces me to the soju kettles. And so soju is a Korean liquor. It's like a potato-based liquor. They drink it like beer. It's really weird. Tastes awful, but they mix it with Kool-Aid and all kinds of stuff. In these bars, they call the bar a soju kettle, and we're getting hammered. And at that point, I had alcohol, but I don't think I'd ever really been drunk. So yeah, that kind of starts somewhat of a pattern, but not, I wasn't heavy into it. But the weekends, we are usually going out to the bar, going out to the red light district, seeing who could drink the most, things like that, because that's what you do. Got involved in community theater, met a lady there. So I was, I guess, 19 by that point. She was 42. She was married to an officer. Big no-no in the military. And they had money. I mean, plenty of money. So we started seeing each other and got very involved. And I would say it went from some weekend drinking to just pretty weird and pretty wild.
So let me ask you a question. So she's married. You're engaged. Is that correct? You're engaged.
Yep.
And so you've got someone back in the States and she's married. So you're basically having an affair with this older woman and, partying, doing that sort of thing. I mean, where are you emotionally and spiritually? So we haven't talked about God in a little bit. And so I didn't ask you if you went through confirmation, but usually you can't be a Presbyterian without going through confirmation. So you would probably say you were a Christian. Did you have any guilt or shame, or did you feel like you were doing something wrong or not?
So I guess you ask a really good question there, because I sort of forgot something that's rather matters, right? So when I was 16, I went to church camp, and it was, with the Presbyterians, but it was good. It was a very good church camp. I went quite a number of times, but when I was 16, I actually accepted Christ at church camp. And it was a great experience. It was wonderful. It's like it just was like walking on a cloud. You know, it was a wonderful thing, and I know that it was real. It wasn't just emotional. I know I entered into a relationship with Christ at that point. One of the problems was, though, I had no real support network. Um, so I'm the new kid. I'm looking for how to fit in, all that stuff, and that's kind of why I think also that I gravitated towards that back of the parking lot crowd. Um, that being said, even though I rather quickly began making somewhat of a mockery of my commitment to follow Christ, the one way that I know that I was saved, that there was something real that happened there, was that I never had peace after that when I was walking the way I was walking. And so I think that adds on top of that, again, because I still had, even though, yes, I'd received Jesus, I still had a lot of that mentality, that performance-based mentality, and that angry God understanding. And so I'm walking a sinful lifestyle and feeling all the worse about it, I think, because I'm like, yeah, I've received Jesus. I'm supposed to be a Christian. I'm living this way. So there was always that. And what ultimately began to happen was, like you said, I'm having an affair with this woman. I'm being a homewrecker. They had kids younger than me. It was pretty weird. I actually had a kid older than me too. Um, I'm a homewrecker. I'm doing all this stuff. And certainly for what it's worth, I think I was open to a lot of things because of my background, because of being molested as a child. I think that opened me up to things that I wouldn't label as normal. So with all of that, I've got in the back of my head what I realize now is the Holy Spirit, and it's not just all those that angry God mentality going on. It's the voice that's back there, that's at times lovingly and at times very sternly calling me. And what happened was, for one, I'm having the affair, and then a little ways into it, she tells me she's pregnant, and I do think she was, and she lost that child with a miscarriage, which then added a layer of guilt onto this. And I don't know, somewhere in all that, I don't know exactly where, the drinking turned in from something that we did, on the weekends with the guys because it was fun, something I did with her because it was fun, to something that was trying to get that voice to go away. So I came back to the States. We did meet up in the States a few times. I came back to the States and I did break it off with my fiance right away. I never told her the truth, never told her why. But I broke it off with her and tried to kind of move on with life. Like I said, I ran into this lady a few times in the States. We had a few flings. But I just had this constant voice, and for months and months and months, it wouldn't leave me alone. And so I just had to go drink it away as much as possible. It just kind of rolled, it spitballed. And I would say I just gradually got to this point where I was so low. When I had to be sober, I was burning myself with cigarettes. I wanted to kill myself, but at that point, I didn't think I was saved. And at that point, I was definitely worried. I'm like, if I kill myself, I know for sure I'm not saved. I definitely had that thought of, you will go to hell, period, end of discussion, if you kill yourself. Okay. And that's the one you ain't coming back from. So I didn't have the courage to do that. But when I had to be sober, I would, smoke my cigarettes and put them out on my arm. I've still got a bunch of, they're probably not even visible there, but I've got a big circle of different scars along there and some up here and one over here. And I would just sit there just putting them out at the same time. And then, if I was really bored, light the cigarette again and put it out again and light it again and smoke it,
So did you feel like the pain that you deserved that pain? Is that the motivation? Is I'm going to cause myself pain because I deserve that pain? I mean, you know what I'm saying? It's
Definitely.
like, okay, I'm going to hurt myself because you know what? That's what I deserve.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So do you also feel like that the voice that you were hearing was the Holy Spirit because you were a Christian, you accepted Christ at the camp? Do you feel like that it was conviction and that the enemy, twisted that and brought in shame? Guilt says that we did something wrong, but shame says that we're a bad person. And it sounds like you were moving to, I'm a bad person and I don't deserve to live, or I don't deserve anything good. Am I describing it accurately or not?
Yeah. You're hitting the nail on the head. And you're right that the voice that I was hearing was very often compassionate, but it was twisted in my head. And if I could just get that voice to be quiet, that's what I wanted. And yeah, when I had to be sober, I dealt with the pain by making it external. At least when you do those kinds of things, you know the source of the pain. Now, the crazy part is this. So I got caught, if you will, because that's not normal behavior. Okay. So I'm in the Army, and a sergeant, and back then, we have our sleeves down all the time because of the sun. So, the sergeant catches me doing this actively, like, burning myself with cigarettes. He sees my arm. He kind of freaks out a little bit. I went up seeing a psychiatrist. They sent me to the psychiatrist, and I had one session. I did all these tests and stuff, but I think I only met with him one time. And the psychiatrist, now the crazy part is I knew that it was guilt, and I knew why, and I knew that I had been walking in sin. And I said that to the guy. The psychiatrist was a Mormon. So when I learned he's a Mormon, I'm like, okay, at least we've got some common ground here to talk. We can talk about God. And so I said to him, hey, I've been doing this stuff, and I'm feeling really guilty because I had this affair and blah, blah, blah. And he didn't bite at all. There was zero discussion of God or anything. He was not going to talk about that. My recollection is that interview was relatively short. That appointment with him was relatively short. He just looks at the test results that I did, all this stuff, and he goes, well, look, the bottom line is your enlistment contract is going to be up in a few months. You're probably not soldier material. Why don't you just go ahead and get out of the Army when your enlistment's up, and there doesn't need to be anything on your record. Just go back to the civilian world and be there. You're not military material. And I'm like, oh, well, that's really helpful. Thanks a lot.
Man.
But the message that I got out of that was, you're hopeless. I'm not even going to waste my time trying to help you. That's what I walked away from. That's what I understood as I walked away. That's what I heard was, you're not worth my time to even try to help you out with this.
There's a difference between being addicted to something and medicating with something. And it sounds to me like you were medicating, you were trying, and I heard this quote, I thought this was really good, that people who drink to drown their sorrow should be told that sorrow knows how to swim. And I think that's a really good analogy because, you kept trying to drown the sorrow, the pain, the hurt. Did you get out of the military after you came back for Korea? Did you finish how long did you stay in?
No, I didn't get out. Let me kind of hit on something that you just said, though, because I think this is actually really important. Okay. I think I would agree with you. I was probably not addicted to the alcohol. And I say that because when I stopped drinking, I never had any side effects from it. Perhaps the Lord delivered me miraculously, but I didn't drink because I had to have a drink. I drank because I was trying to get rid of this voice. And when that got fixed, the drinking went away. I don't think I was chemically addicted to it. And I'm emphasizing that point because I think people need to understand this. Okay. Just because you drink like a fish may not be that you're addicted. It may be the root cause. And that's the beauty behind the recovery journey, especially doing something like a 12-step study, is because as you're walking through this, you can look at those questions and say, okay, am I chemically addicted? Do I need a rehab program? And maybe you do. There's nothing wrong with that. Hey, that's a beautiful thing when you come to understand that. But it may also be that it's not the drug, it's not the alcohol, it's not the thing that's got you. It's something else, and you're masking it. And so that's an important distinction, because when I got right with these things, the drinking instantly vanished. So coming back then, how did I get right with that? So no, I did not get out of the Army. I got transferred over as I had been a truck driver, and I'm not going to bore you with all the details on the hows and whys, but I wound up, I'm sure because they were worried about dealing with me. The chaplain had a 5-ton truck, and he needed a driver for his 5-ton truck. But I wound up basically being the chaplain's assistant. He didn't have a regular chaplain assistant. Started going to chapel again, but there was 3 women that went to that chapel service. Civilians. They were either spouses or civilians, and they were mother figures, and I never had that. And so these 3 older women kind of took me under their wing like I was their long lost son, and started providing some of that. And it was novel to me because there was no attraction, there was no romantic or sexual element to any of this. It was just pure motherly love, and it blew me away. I talked with them about some of this stuff. I had an opportunity to go back to church camp, to the very same camp where I had been as a kid and got saved, and I went, and I sat on a porch out there just looking out, and plenty of things happening around me, but it was just the whole universe for a little while was me and God on this porch. And I just told him I was done, that I was done doing it my way. And I recommitted my life to Christ right there. And it was wonderful. In that moment, I was able to let go of all these rocks I was carrying. And I was able to forgive a lot of things. And I told God I was done with women. So I go back home, and within 2 months, I found a wife. I run into this wonderful Baptist girl. She was working a drive-through at McDonald's. I was needing a late-night burger. And when I started creeping on her, she invited me to church. She said, "You ever want to see me again, you got to come to church." I said, "All right, where at?" And so I showed up at church, and we were married so it was August was church camp, and we were married in June of the next year.
That's awesome. Tell me a little bit more about what happened next.
So part of that whole process of coming back to Christ, all those different parts that were coming together, was I started reading the Bible. We didn't just read the Bible and take it at face value. I started reading the thing, and it was blowing my mind. Okay, I'm just seeing stuff, and it's so much simpler than what I was raised to see it as. You know what I mean? It was wonderful. But here's the thing. So we're a young married couple. She comes out of a pretty rough background herself. Okay, there was a lot of trauma and hurts in her background. There was a lot of trauma and hurts in my background. Now, I had dealt with the hurts and whatnot from what I had done, but I brought all that other baggage, family baggage, the sexual abuse that I had never dealt with. I brought all that into the marriage too. So we got along pretty good. About 6 months into the marriage, I get deployed to the Middle East for a year. So we didn't have anything to fight about for a year. That was great. I'm several years into marriage, and in the back of my head, we're still dealing with my past and her past as well. We'd gone to marriage counseling when I was in Colorado, and it came out that I had been sexually abused as a child, and we didn't really have the opportunity to deal with that. We wound up not being able to continue with all the marriage therapy and stuff we were doing, which was kind of problematic. A lot of reasons why, but so this was out now, and the effect of it coming out was that it was on my mind all the time. So we go through a stretch of several years where I don't know what to do with it, but memories of abuse are on my mind. And I essentially have, I suppose it would be maybe fair to say, post-traumatic stress from it. Our church wound up starting a Celebrate Recovery ministry, and I didn't really understand what it was, but something in my gut, I suppose maybe I'll say, is the Holy Spirit was like, you need that. Whatever it is, you need that. Okay. So I started going, And so for the first time in my life, outside of my wife and a professional therapist, I'm I'm telling them about these things that happened and the way they've shaped me and the ways that they were affecting me directly at that time, because that was a very rough time.
Isn't it
Go ahead.
interesting that, and my sponsor, Rodney, always talks about the beach ball that we shove underwater and that we hold it down, but it's trying to come up, and we're
Yeah.
holding it down, we're
Yes.
holding it down, and then all of a sudden it explodes out of the water and it hits me in the face and splashes other people, and it just causes all this problem because I've been trying to hold that thing down. And as you were talking, I mean, it sounds to me like you've been burying this thing for so long, but it's just working its way up, and eventually it just dominates your thought life, and it seems like it's bleeding into your marriage, it's bleeding into your ministry and all these things, and you just can't get it out of your mind. Is that accurate? Does it feel like it just came up like that?
That's a great way to put it. Yeah. Yeah, it was. And at the same time, my wife was also dealing with some of her issues too. But yeah, that's a great analogy. It was there and it wouldn't go away. And it was, in one sense, it was very much like several years prior, back when I had been trying to drink stuff away all the time. Back then, I was trying to drink away the voice of the Holy Spirit. Now it's these memories. Um, and so I just not knowing what to do with it. I'm distressed, or my wife and I are fighting and stuff all the time. Um, and as you can predict, of course, our love life as a married couple wasn't very good. That area was definitely not good. So I started into this group, the step study. We started talking about it, and I had a lot of big epiphanies. One of them is simply this: that there are men that can be trusted. I mean, I was sharing stuff with them that I was like certain that everybody in the world is now going to know, but they never breathed a word to anyone. They were able to hear it. Here's one of the big takeaways, and for anybody who is going through the steps, you come to some of those big moments. So doing the inventory is a big moment. Doing the fifth step's a big moment. Okay, and the power of the fifth step is this: that when you can actually say it to another human being, and you discover that people are not going to look at you and say, "Ew, what? You did what? This happened? What?" And I know there's been far too many people in this world who've had that experience where they tried to let it out and they got nothing, or they got a terribly negative reaction. And I was almost expecting that. But as we walked through this, I didn't get that. I got grace. I got love. Um, and I can't even begin to describe it, the way that in and of itself was a burden off my shoulders, to be able to say it and acknowledge truth and not be treated like I was a weirdo, or like I was a victim or a child. That was the other thing. I didn't want to be treated like I was some, oh, you poor child thing. You know what I mean? Um, and they didn't do that either. It was wonderful. So a lot of healing happened in that step study group. Yeah.
That's amazing. There's healing in the revealing. There's healing in that. And
Amen.
and so what a powerful thing. So, my podcast is about change. How did that change your perspective, and how did that help your life?
Oh man, I mean, where do you even start on that one? Joy, I would say, is one of the number one things. It gave me insight into the love of God. Um, Over time, I've gotten more of these glimpses of the depth of the love of God, and it's so freeing. You know, that's what it's about.
Amen.
I mean, applying that day by day, we look at ourselves, we look at the sin, we look at the shortcomings, we see that, and we just cannot fathom how we can be loved. And he's up there the whole time, just being like, dude, if you only knew. If you only understood,
Yeah.
it would rock us all to our core.
How did you offer forgiveness to the man who assaulted you as a child? How did you offer forgiveness? How did you let go of that?
That's a great question. One morning, I'm sitting down, doing my devotions. Okay. I was reading, I want to say like Exodus or something like that. It was in the Old Testament, had nothing to do with grace, had nothing to do with forgiveness, nothing like that. I'm just reading the Bible. And I hear a voice. It's not audible. If you've ever experienced it, you know what I mean. It's not an audible voice, but it's a voice that speaks in words. And it's very simple. It was like, I've forgiven you so much. And you're holding on to something that happened 20 years ago to somebody who has no sway or bearing in your life. And you've done a whole lot of things that could be held against you. I forgave it all. Why can't you forgive this? I kind of have this, I don't want to say it's not a vision by any stretch, but I had this moment of clarity where I'm like, you know what? When we look at Christ, when we look at the cross, we're equal. But when you look at the holiness of God, okay, anything that comes against his holiness is evil. I mean, Jesus didn't go to the cross just for these terrible, terrible things. He suffered a terrible, terrible death to cover all of it. And so in that moment of clarity, I guess somehow I just, for a brief moment, I grasped that concept that when you look at Christ in his perfection, in his holiness, and how big the sacrifice of Christ is, we're equal. I don't care if you're a mass murderer or what. It's only in human terms that we separate these things out. Christ died for everything I had done, and I did terrible things to people. How can I hold on to it? I think it was that day, or maybe it was a day after, but shortly thereafter, I sat down and I wrote a letter. And before I stuck that letter in that mail, I knew that no matter his response, I was going to be okay. And when I stuck it in that box, I knew the forgiveness was real that time. And it has been. That was probably 5 years ago now. And I've never looked back. And I have not had anger. And I have a genuine, I don't want to say pity, because it's not pity, but a genuine sorrow, I guess, for him and where he's at. There was peace over it.
Yeah.
That's how I knew.
That's awesome. Do you have any scriptures that you wanna pass on to the listeners?
I do, actually. It's this one right here tattooed on my arm. Therefore, since we have been justified by faith, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ. Through him also we have obtained access by faith into this grace in which we stand, and we rejoice in hope of the glory of God. Not only that, but we rejoice in our sufferings, knowing that suffering produces endurance, and endurance produces character, and character produces hope. And hope does not put us to shame, because God's love has been poured into our hearts through the Holy Spirit who has been given to us. Hope is what so much of this is about.
Amen. Dan, thanks so much for sharing your life change story with us. Hey, if you are listening today and you've been stuffing the hurt from your past, maybe you've been medicating that hurt, but it just won't go away. It keeps pushing itself up through the cracks of your life. Medicating the symptoms and ignoring the real problem will not bring healing to your life. However, Jesus Christ can bring true healing as you allow him into every area of your life, just like he did for Dan. However, if nothing changes, nothing changes. See you next time.